Welcome to Lean to the Left, home of no-holds-barred commentary, plus interviews with fascinating people, some of them top experts, others simply with interesting stories to tell. You'll never know who'll show up at Lean to the Left. Now here's your host, Bob Gaddy.
Hey, today we welcome Michael P. McDonald. He's a nationally recognized expert on elections and national politics, author of the new book, From Pandemic to Insurrection, Voting in the 2020 U.S. Presidential Election. Michael's professor of political science at the University of Florida and a leading resource on American elections. His website, electproject.org, disseminates election statistics and is widely used as an authoritative source by media, scholars, and others. In his book, Michael tells the story of voting in the 2020 election in context with the COVID-19 pandemic, the big lie, the January 6 hearings, and more. It takes a look at new voting laws that have emerged since the election, several designed to benefit Republicans while making it harder for people to vote. We'll talk about all of that today and also look forward to the 2022 elections and what our guest is looking for as Democrats battle to hold on to their slim majorities in the House and Senate in the face of redistricting and other serious challenges. Hey, Michael, thanks for joining us today on Lean to the Left.
Great to be with you, Bob.
Really appreciate you taking the time to do this. First of all, let's talk about your book. I want to get that right up front. I understand it will be published and available on September 5th.
That's correct, yes. It's a labor of love that really started back when, at the very beginning of the pandemic. So back during the primaries in 2020, I started getting many reporters calling me up and asking me, how does mail balloting work?
Right.
And so I just started giving the same spiel over and over again. And I'd explained the whole process of mail balloting to people. And so eventually I just said, you know what, I need to make a document so that I can just hand it to the reporters. I'm tired of spending an hour with every reporter explaining the same thing over and over again.
Right.
So I started writing up this document about the history of mail balloting and how it works. And as I started doing that, by the end of a week or so working on that thing, I was like, this is like a book chapter. This isn't just like a little briefer for some reporters, because they kept asking the same questions. I tried to answer those questions for them.
Right.
And then I just decided at that point, well, I've already got a book chapter written. I'm just going to continue to just collect information about what's happening in the election. And I do that. I mean, during election season, I'm very well known for producing these early voting statistics.
Right.
So I make those available, and I'm tracking what's going on with elections in near real time every election cycle. And so it was just sort of natural for me to be collecting all these stories and all this information about the election, because that's what I normally do during an election cycle.
Sure.
And so that just, all this other stuff that's added more context for what was happening. And, and I would have hoped that everything was going to be done by November.
Right.
But of course it didn't. And then again, that just like added some more chapters onto a book. And so that's really where it was. I mean, it just sort of evolved as part of my experiences in the 2020 election. But it's really not my story. And I really want to say this. I mean, it's a story about our election officials, our volunteer poll workers. They did a tremendous job during the pandemic to execute an election that had the highest turnout rate since 1900. All right, so people wanted to vote. And let's give also kudos to the American people for showing up in unprecedented numbers in a modern election and voting. So it's not just the story of what I was doing. It's a story about all these other people. And just one last thing about this, because I really feel very deeply about this. When I say like this is for election officials, I mean, seriously, there were people who died because we did not protect them enough during the pandemic. And it's just a tragedy that happened, and other people got sick. We don't even know how many other people they got sick, how many people are scarred for life.
Right.
All of that happened so that we could continue being a democracy. And, so it's really those people that we ought to be thanking why we still have a democracy here in the United States.
Well, Michael, I have to tell you, I had a chance to review the advanced copy of your book, and I found it to be extremely informative, incredibly well written, and I loved the ending area where you talk about the future, and I want to talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But you write in your book that the 2020 election was both a resounding success, and you just mentioned that about the tremendous turnout, and a resounding failure. Can you explain that?
Well, it's a resounding success because we had this extremely high turnout election under unprecedented circumstances.
Right.
And so again, just election officials deserve a lot of credit for doing that. And voters do too. As I documented in the book, voters changed their behavior as well. They cast their ballots by mail. A lot of them hadn't done that before.
Sure.
They returned those mail ballots sooner than they had in the past because they were concerned about what was going on at the post office. And we knew that mail delivery was slowed. So people were proactive. And so they took their democracy into their own hands, and they managed to do that successfully. So that's all the great success stories about how people overcame those challenges, those hurdles. The negative side, of course, is what's happened around the big lie.
Right.
And now we have one party, their confidence is destroyed in our electoral system. And we're already seeing the consequences of that. I mean, when I wrote this book, unfortunately, you got to get a book to the publisher at some point. And I just kept writing it. And yes, we know that there are all these candidates that Trump was supporting that believe that he won and are would even overturn the election today if they could, which you can't. It's not something you can do. It's not a thing, but they think it's a thing. And certainly some of these people, if they hold power, like, in Arizona, the Secretary of State there, the governor in Pennsylvania, if any of these Republicans win, they're basically promising that no Democrat will ever win a statewide office in their state ever again. That they will just say that's fraudulent. The corrosive things that have happened since Trump tried to use this justification of the election was somehow stolen from me, and he continues to say that to this day. It's just cascaded down into all levels. Just again, these stories happen, and it's just mind-numbing when you think about them all. But we just had an election office in Texas. All of the people quit because they were being harassed and stalked by Trump supporters. And so we're in for a tough ride here. We need to get through 2022. And then we got to get through 2024. And let's put aside, if Trump is actually put in jail or something like that, what's going to happen? But just from the election standpoint, things are really tough. And we still, just because we got past 2020 doesn't mean that this battle for democracy is over.
And what are some of the lessons you think that we've learned from the 2020 election and its aftermath? Have we learned anything?
I wish we could say we learned anything.
Yeah.
Because it just seems like we keep making the same mistakes.
Yeah.
I say that tongue in cheek. Yes, there's a lot that we learned. Election officials certainly came together. Despite everything that happened with Trump, he actually had some competent people over in the Department of Homeland Security, and they did create an infrastructure to manage threats to election integrity.
Right.
And so when we had Chris Krebs, his point person on technology issues in the Department of Homeland Security, say that the 2020 election was the most secure election ever run, he's right. They built that infrastructure up to accomplish that goal.
Right.
And there are ways in which things have been carried forward. And this even happened during the 2020 election too. It's something else I document in the book. In the early primaries, it didn't even look like we were going to be able to have an election in November. I mean, there were so many failures that were going on left and right.
Mm-hmm.
So even in real time, from that period of time, from about May until November, election officials started learning, and they started learning from the states that had failures, and they've learned from those failures, and they improved the way in which they were running the elections by making sure ballots were getting out, making sure ballots are going to get postmarked. Some things that you don't really think about, ballot tracking portals, online portals for requesting ballots, things that we didn't really need so much before suddenly became to the forefront.
Yeah.
And we built out a lot of that infrastructure in a very short period of time, and it has extended forward. So, I mean, there have been some real things that we've learned here and that we can carry forward. But I just fear, like, who's going to replace those election officials in Gillespie, Texas, who quit in mass because they were all being terrorized?
Right.
Who's going to do that? And then who's going to run that election? And how are they going to count the ballots in that county?
Right.
What does that mean for democracy in Texas and beyond?
Yeah, well, we've got across the nation in many areas, people who are winning election for these positions that are involved in counting the ballots and managing the election, and they're saying that they're not going to allow any Democrats to win. I mean, really, that's a serious problem.
Yeah, it is. It really is. I mean, it's not. We can joke about it, but this is just the level of seriousness here is just beyond pale, because and we're going to have to continue to remain vigilant about this. And so, hopefully all of these characters are going to be defeated by sensible voters, that even Republicans would say, yeah, democracy works when there's two political parties. And I firmly believe that. I mean, I've worked for Republicans. I do a lot of my work on the Democratic side. But look, I don't want to both sides everything, because people both sides stuff, right? Sure. But sometimes Democrats do bad things too. Well, sure. They do bad things for democracy. They gerrymander. They do something like that. Yeah. And I stand up for Republicans when Democrats try to warp the system. It's just that right now there's no both sides about it, because it's so much on one side of the political spectrum where we have all this undermining of democracy going on. Yeah. Democracy works best when there's electoral competition, when voters are presented with choices, and it's the candidates and the party's responsibilities to make those choices known to the voters, and then the voters decide for better or worse. Yeah. And after the 2016 election, Clinton, there were conspiracy theorists saying that it was Russia that managed to get Trump elected, but Clinton, to her credit, conceded the election, right, and congratulated Trump for winning. That's what you do as a mature person. just common sense decency. Yeah. We're missing that common sense decency in our body politic right now. And if there happen to be Republicans listening to this, it's not about Trump. It's about the United States. It's about this country. It's about being nice to other people. It's not a spectator sport like World Wrestling or something where you're sitting in there cheering and jeering for your person and jeering the other side. That's not how this should work. It doesn't work very well, and it's going to lead to really bad things down the road, where we get random crazy people already firing nail guns at FBI offices. Because again, just to tell you about the level of crazy, this guy did that because he thought that bulletproof glass could be broken by a nail gun. I mean, I know that's sort of crazy stuff, but there are people who believe this, and it's infecting everything. Yeah. Let's not do that. Let's not elect these sorts of people to office that actually have control over our election system. Democrats are good enough. They're not. If Republicans win, they're going to let they're going to nominate that person, and they're going to let them win and take the election. if it's fair and square. We don't want to have a situation where one party says we win always. That's not democracy.
Now we're looking ahead to the 2022 elections, just a few months away, really a couple of months away. I understand that your research shows that turnout is not declining, but that the ineligible population is rising. What does that mean?
Well, one of the first things I ever did after I graduated from grad school out in California, UC San Diego, was I wrote this seminal piece about voter turnout.
Okay.
And it turned out that people were just calculating the turnout rates the wrong way. They were including all these people who were ineligible to vote. Non-citizens were the largest part. And again, like there's lots of, we could discuss policy issues, but I'm not going to say like nativism is right, but people are right to at least raise the policy issue about what does it mean to have all of these immigrants coming into the United States.
Right.
And it reached a peak in the 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
And so because it had been this ineligible non-citizen population been increasing in the United States, but people weren't taking that into account, it looked like turnout was just going down and down and down. Eventually, no one was going to vote.
Right.
And I recalculated the turnout rate to say these are the eligible people. This is the turnout rate among those eligible. We shouldn't count the people who aren't eligible to vote when we're calculating these turnout rates. And when I did that, I showed that, well, actually turnout had been pretty flat. It hadn't been going down. And then right after I wrote that, I'm not going to take credit for it. The American people should take credit for it. Turnout rates went up. And then we were suddenly back in the turnout rates of the 1960s. Now, you raised the 2022 election in your question, so let me answer it in a way. 2018, well, first of all, 2020, that was the highest turnout rate since 1900, over a century ago.
Yeah.
All right? Nobody is alive that voted in that election. We have not seen this level of participation since then. Let's go back to 2018. That was the highest turnout rate since 1914 for a midterm election. Mm-hmm. So we are in unprecedented times for civic engagement in modern history. There was this high point back in the 50s and 60s. We broke past that right now. And there's really only one explanation for it. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I think that the explanation is that people are damn worried about what's going on. But the thing is that worry is on both sides and it conflicts.
But I think there's one name that just
it's Donald
explains
Trump.
It all. It's Donald Trump.
Yeah. It is
Donald Trump.
He's the one that's behind this whole worry that I just mentioned.
Right. Yeah. So as soon as he becomes president, suddenly everybody becomes really interested in politics.
Right.
At unprecedented scale of level of interest in modern times.
Right.
And so as long as he's around, people are still going to be interested. And so what have we seen? Well, his Supreme Court picks do put out these opinions on abortion, which are way out of mainstream. Mm-hmm. And now we've got the whole business about, him stealing documents. And I'm sure there's lots of other things going on within the Department of Justice we don't even know about at this point. So, he is still here. Yeah. He ain't going away. He's supporting all these candidates that are, want to destroy democracy, to be subservient to him. Yeah. That he has not gone away. As long as he's here on the scene, we're going to have high turnout. And just today, there was a poll by Morning Consult, which showed that both sides are really angry right now.
Right.
I don't. Maybe we even go higher than that 2018 election that we just got past. I don't think if you'd asked the prognosticators and the forecasters earlier this year, they would have said, all the Republicans are all fired up. The Democrats aren't going to vote.
Right.
And that's not what's showing up in the polling now. As we get closer to election day and everything that's happening with the Dobbs decision and Trump and everything else, suddenly Democrats are really fired up too. Republicans are already fired up. Yeah. So we're going to see an election For a midterm election, it's going to look more like a presidential election before 2020. That's what we're on course for. Our election system can certainly handle it. For better or worse, we always vote at higher rates when we're voting for president. But we're still going to see something like for the U.S., just an unprecedented number of people voting for a midterm election is my guess. Things could change between now and November, but that's my guess at this point. We're looking at probably 52, 53% of those eligible vote in this next election.
Okay. So what do you think regarding those elections? What do you think the January 6 hearings and the Trump investigations and all of that will mean when it comes to those elections? I mean, you just said that both parties are fired up, and that those two factors are really important in terms of that. Who's going to have the edge, do you think, when we come down to the end of it?
Well, it's anyone's guess. I think we're going to see something like we saw in 2018. So 2018 was supposed to be this big blue wave that was going to sweep across the country. And it didn't fully happen that way. Of course, Democrats did better in 2018, as you typically expect the out-of-power party to do in a midterm election.
Yeah.
But Republicans were still engaged. I mean, you don't get the highest turnout rate since 1914 for a midterm election with only Democrats showing up to vote.
Sure.
There were Republicans showing up. They just weren't as engaged and as fired up as the Democrats were. So Republicans were voting too. And that was sort of pivotal in some of these, Montana Senate election or someplace like that, a red state where there lots of Republicans were showing up to vote. And that's what's going to happen, I think, this time around, is that we're going to see lots of engagement, those blue areas, and especially like the suburbs where there's these higher education whites that are moving against the Republican Party at the moment. Democrats could do pretty well in some of those places. And it may be enough for them to carry places like, aside from all the really crummy candidates the Republicans are running, but places like Pennsylvania and Georgia, and maybe even Wisconsin, who knows? But a lot of these places that people thought were going to be competitive don't look too competitive at the moment. And even here, we just got a poll today in Florida. That's at the University of Florida, so that's we got one where Val Demings is beating Marco Rubio. Now, I don't believe that poll for a second.
Really?
I think there's a lot. We could dissect that poll left and right to find out, is that poll true or not? But what I do think is, which is true, is that race is probably a lot closer than what we would have said about a month ago. And so we'll have to see some more polls to see if that's confirming. But in these big, diverse urban states, there's still a lot of rural people and a lot of old people in Florida too that help out the Republican Party. But in these diverse states, that high turnout's going to lift up, and it could be determinative for places like Pennsylvania and Georgia, for example, that just spring to mind because the candidates are just so crummy for the Republicans, and it looks like those are going to be easy wins for the Democrats. Where again, if we were looking at this 6 or 7 months ago, we would have thought, those are pickup opportunities for the Republican Party.
What do you think of the Senate?
In the House?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you what you think of the Senate race in Georgia.
Yeah, I think Warnock is a good candidate, and Republicans have, again, Trump-endorsed Herschel Walker is not the best candidate that they could have run, and so Georgia's been trending towards the Democratic Party. There was going to be this wave against the Democrats, is typically what happens, but now Democrats are fired up. So a battleground state where you've got an incumbent Democrat, Warnock, I think if I were to place money on it, I would say Warnock will win. Is it a guarantee? No, I wouldn't say that either. But at this stage, I think he's most likely. I think that's the sort of outcome that you're looking at.
I guess it depends on which which of Herschel Walker's personalities ends up being on the campaign trail, right? Doesn't he have? Isn't he the guy that's got a whole bunch of different personalities?
Well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to really have too much about him. He's just a really bad candidate,
Right.
and he's
Right.
obviously been knocked in the head
Yeah.
quite a few times.
Yeah.
And
For sure.
so,
Yeah.
again, Republicans, they could have made better choices here. But
Yeah.
Trump, he's so wedded to this big lie. He wants people who kneel to him and give him fealty. Those are the candidates that he'll support.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just damaging the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
And it very well may have cost them the Senate. It could even cost them the House of Representatives. Now, again, these characters who are running for Senate, we all kind of know who they are because the national media follow the Senate races. People don't follow the House races as closely.
Right.
And so their partisanship matters more than it will for a Senate or a gubernatorial election. Mm-hmm. And so it's in those House races that we may see that, the sort of underlying partisanship, even if there's a really bad candidate that's running for either side, right. But it'll be people voting more of their party line because they just don't know enough about those candidates. Uh-huh. So again, if I were betting, I would still think that the Republicans are going to win control of the House of Representatives, but it's not nearly as much of a slam dunk as we thought it was going to be 6 or 7 months ago. So I think there's a chance, but again, not a big one, that the Democrats could retain control of the House. It will be very consequential because otherwise, if Republicans do gain control, it's going to be nonstop investigations into Garland and
for sure.
And whatever, Hunter Biden. I mean, that's what it's going to be. It's not going to be about making policy. It's going to be about just, again, continuing this narrative that government's corrupt and they're the ones that are going to fix it, even though they didn't do it when they were in power.
Yeah. So your prediction is that the House probably will go to the Republicans narrowly. What about the Senate?
Right now, I think it's possible the Democrats could pick up some seats in the Senate. Okay. Which would be consequential because if the Democrats also manage to hold control of the House, then they could pass some very meaningful legislation by doing away with the filibuster. Mm-hmm. But if Republicans get control of the House, then Democrats aren't going to do anything about the filibuster.
Do you think there's enough of a chance that they can pick up enough seats in the Senate to do away with the filibuster?
I think so. I mean, Pennsylvania would be a pickup. Wisconsin would be a pickup. Uh-huh. I don't know what to make of this Florida poll.
They need 10, right? Or no?
Well, no, they need 2, because Manchin and Sinema have said that they are against it, but everybody else is for making like carve-outs for voting rights, for example.
Right. Okay.
And so it's really, you just need 50 votes. It's not 60.
Right. Okay. All right. So if the Republicans take control of Congress, what would that mean for the 2024 presidential election?
Well, not as much as you might think in some respects, because there's still Biden there as a veto. So they're not going to be able to do much proactively. Mm-hmm. They could only do things negatively. Mm-hmm. And that's where things could be consequential. We just sort of were talking about, musing about, is it possible that Democrats could get the 52 votes that they need in the Senate to do away with filibuster? Well, that would be meaningful because you would have reform on voting rights. Right. And so that could be very consequential if the Democrats retain control of the House of Representatives. But if they don't, then that's going to be completely off the table. Republicans aren't going to put a bill up that's, even if it passes the Senate, they're not going to put a voting rights bill up in the House. They're not going to hear it.
Sure. All right. So what do you think? Looking at 2024, Are we assuming Trump is going to run?
I at this point we have to assume that he will,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of uncertainty there.
Mm-hmm.
I have my own governor, DeSantis,
Mm-hmm.
who is waiting in the wings.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows in this? And if there is a lot of people, I think, overestimate his capability of winning Florida because he won in a very narrow recount in 2018. And so, yeah, he's an incumbent. There's some advantages that come with incumbency.
Yeah.
But those assumptions about DeSantis just cruising on to victory in 2022 have a lot to do with what people were thinking were the conditions back in, 7 or 8 months ago.
Oh.
And again, this other poll, again, I don't know how much weight to put onto it, but there was an earlier iteration of that poll where DeSantis was up by 20 points, and now he's only up by 8 points. So that makes sense. I mean, that gap is narrowing.
Okay.
Will DeSantis probably win? Yeah. But again, you're thinking about 2024. Well, he's the one that's most likely at this point to be in second place. Are there others that could emerge? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's, you have to go way back, but think back to 92. No one knew who Bill Clinton was at this point.
True.
So, everybody knew George Bush, but they didn't know Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
So, there are some folks out there that, one way or another, they could have suddenly come out of nowhere and hit the scene.
Well, people know who Liz Cheney is, right?
Trying to do that.
People know who Liz Cheney is, right?
Yeah, she's not going to win a Republican nomination at this stage. I mean, the party's gone too cuckoo.
What's her long game?
Sort of stuff. What's her long game?
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know her. I don't. If I were just to randomly guess, and that would just be some sort of media career on one of the major networks, would probably be where she lands.
You think that?
Most likely.
Yeah.
That's just me. I don't think she has any further prospects within the Republican Party.
Okay.
Not until the fever cools. And just to say, like, again, if we took the big step back in our history,
mm-hmm.
as bad as things are right now, the fever has cooled other times.
Yeah.
So it's hopefully that's what we're just going through. We're just going through whatever COVID hangover it is, and we're still like getting the symptoms from it. Yeah. But eventually our politics settles down again. Mm-hmm. I hope that's what happens. I mean, I want to be a hopeful person, and I want to thank all of those Republican friends that I've worked with over the years on various projects and lawsuits. Mm-hmm. That and they tell me that things are crazy, so they acknowledge their own party is kind of crazy at the moment.
Right.
Hopefully they're going to get the upper hand down the road, and we'll have some normalcy return.
Well, that'd be nice.
But it's hard to think that like when it's all happening around you.
So let's go to the Democrats now. What about Biden? Does he pass the baton, or is he?
Again, presidents, if they want to run for re-election, are shoo-ins for the nomination. Sure. And a lot of the angst on the left was that Biden wasn't doing enough, but suddenly he has a string of successes.
Right.
So, and then again, there's so many different dynamics. Again, Bill Clinton's a good example of this. Mm-hmm. In 1994, people said his career was over as president. They can't possibly win re-election after Republicans win control of the House in 94. And it turned out it was actually pretty good for him to battle Newt Gingrich and politically. And so he rolls to an easy re-election in 1996. So there's so many unknowns. There's just so many unknowns for 2024.
And there's so many things that could happen between now and then. I mean, we don't know what these investigations into Trump are going to turn into. And I think that's going to have the major impact over everything else, honestly. Do you agree?
I agree. It's a major factor and force.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump is just by himself is a major factor and force in American politics. So whatever plays out here, we'll just have to see.
Yeah, you alluded a minute ago to the polarization that we're into. You write in your book that Trump is, quote, has driven a stake deep into the heart of America's democracy by undermining the faith that Republicans have in the fairness and legitimacy of America's elections and government. So my question to you is, are we doomed to ideological polarization, or do you think that'll moderate over time?
Again, in the big history of things, we get out of this. That happened in the progressive era, back at the end of the beginning of the 1900s. When I keep saying like turnout rates were the highest since 1900 or highest since 1914, that was right at the end of this very high peak of turnout that was happening, and it was also high levels of polarization, political polarization between Democrats and Republicans. And then it all collapsed, and the polarization collapsed, and at the same time the turnout collapsed. Mm-hmm. So you could tell a story about how, well, people just didn't think politics was so important anymore, and that was driving down turnout rates during this period of time. And then as we've seen polarization increase since the 1990s, that could be the flip side of it. So we're seeing people really think politics matters, so they become engaged and they participate.
Yeah.
Is it, again, when I talk in that sentence in the book, I'm really saying that there's one simple cure for Republicans' distrust of the electoral system, and that's just for Trump to say that he lost, fair and square, just like Clinton did, just like every other president before him did. He's the only one, and so that's the simple thing. We just have to have Republicans expressing support. And as an aside, how we got here is kind of important. I try to document this in the book, but I probably don't do a good enough job of it, which is that Republicans have been spreading these lies about elections for years, and it served their purposes really well. Okay. There was this photo identification lawsuit that went up to the Supreme Court that came out of Indiana. It's called Crawford among the legal experts. And Republicans made the argument, the Republican state government made the argument that they needed that photo identification to deter impersonation fraud. And the court said, all right, well, how many cases of impersonation fraud have you ever had in Indiana? And the state said 0. All right. Literally, that's in the court documents. I'm not making this up.
Okay.
And the Supreme Court said, you know what? We're going to uphold this law, not because there's any evidence of fraud. There's 0. That's the state admits that. It's that there's the potential for the fraud.
Okay.
All right. And it's just trying to assuage people's concerns about the potential for the fraud. That's why we have to have this suppressive law. So everything else that's happening around, all the other laws that are happening, and there's just so many that if you want to know them all, you have to go to Brennan Center. They've got a good roundup of everything that's going on. Yeah. All of these are being justified by the big lie. The big lie serves itself, right? It's like, you lie about the elections, and then it gives you reasons to implement these suppressive laws so that you can get into power and do more lying about the elections. And so that's, if we're going to try to break out of it, we have to have Republicans admit that elections are secure and they're well run. And there are some Republicans who are responsible enough to do that, but it just serves too many other political interests for people to say otherwise.
Right.
And as long as we're in that state of the world where a super majority, like 95% of the Republicans, believe that it's in their electoral interests to disparage elections so they can pass these suppressive laws, nothing's going to change about this. So Trump could do something. It would help if other Republicans would follow suit, but even that, they're not going to do it because, one, it serves Trump, but also it serves their broader interests of passing these laws, and that's going to be hard for us to get out of that situation.
While you were talking, it just occurred to me. I was thinking back at a image I saw. I think it was on Sunday morning, the Sunday morning show this past Sunday, where there was an interview of some interview of some people. I think it was in Florida on a tour bus. I think maybe it was at, I don't know, Disney World or whatever it is. Anyway, they were asked by the reporter, who was one of the old line CBS News reporters, what they thought was the election fair. And only one person on that tour bus raised their hand and said that, yes, it was. And the questions went on about the election and about believing what Trump said. And except for that one person, everybody, agreed with Trump's position on those things. And I'm just seeing so much of that, especially here in South Carolina, where we're constantly, butting our heads up against the wall to elect Democrats. We have some good young candidates here. But it's really, really hard because of this entrenched idea. People just believe what this guy says, no matter what it is. And it's just hard to fathom that.
It's all the signs of a cult.
Yeah.
But again, when your side loses an election, you're going to say, hey, I'm disappointed. Could we have done better? I mean, think about another way to think about it is like football games. Everybody, lots of people like football games, right?
Right.
And if it comes down to the last play of the game and the referee makes a bad call, who are you going to blame for the outcome of the game?
Sure.
Your team
Sure.
or the referee?
Sure.
You're going to blame the referee.
Of course.
And you're going to come up with all these conspiracy theories, like the refs were paid off, the refs were, blind, whatever it was, right?
Right.
Terrible, terrible call.
Right.
It's the same thing with politics. Right. We want to believe, we're so invested.
Right.
We believe that our team can't lose. And it's not the fault of our team. It's the fault of something else. The other team cheated. The refs were in on it, something else. But guess what? The game shouldn't have been that close in the first place if your team was so good. All right. So just the first part of it, So that last play of the game, if your team was really good, they shouldn't have to win the game on the last play of the game.
True.
One thing.
Good.
But the other thing is stuff happens, and little things get magnitude way out of proportion whenever we have a very close call at the end of a game or an election. And so, are there 170 million people do something, 150 million people do something? Of course there are going to be some errors. Of course there are going to be some mistakes.
Sure.
Does that mean the whole thing was wrong and fraudulent? No. Right. Do we learn from them? And again, just thinking it through, and sometimes election officials have nobody but themselves to blame. Again, they get magnitude, these errors get magnitude way out of proportion. Mm-hmm. But the whole thing about Antrim County, Michigan, where one of the election workers misprogrammed the ballot tabulation because they had a candidate off the ballot and they had to fix it at the last minute, and they had to fix the tabulation machines, and they did it all rush job right before the election. And so they report the wrong results. And on election night, one of the things I do is I call elections for the media conglomerates. I work on what they call a decision desk.
You do that sort of stuff.
And all of us are looking at that going, Antrim County, oh, that's a mistake. There was no doubt about it. Every one of us looking at it go, oh, yeah, that's just a mistake. Let's ignore that. That can't be right.
Right.
That Biden's winning that, but everywhere else he's losing. Every other red place in Michigan he's losing. Right. It's clearly a tabulation error, and sure enough, a couple hours later it gets fixed. And but because there was some Dominion voting machines involved in it, suddenly it becomes the hugest conspiracy theory that Hugo Chavez somehow from beyond the grave reached out and flipped the election for Trump.
Yeah.
And people are making money off of that, of course,
Sure.
and it serves Trump's interests. And of course, now Fox has had to apologize. We don't know about whatever else was involved in that lawsuit, and there's multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar lawsuits against other characters like Giuliani and others. So, all of that, you can trace it back to just a stupid little error. Those things happen. We don't need to magnify them out of proportion.
Right.
It was fixed.
Yeah.
A recount was done. Actually, 3 recounts were done on that county, and they all showed that Trump won, and that was a mistake, and everybody agrees that it was a mistake.
Right.
There was not some huge conspiracy of reprogramming voting machines across the country to throw the election to Trump. To Biden.
Right. Right.
That would have been the 2016 allegations. So, so come on, it's the same thing with a football game. People make mistakes sometimes. Don't blow big, little mistakes way out of proportion where you think like this was somehow, the whole season, the whole, Super Bowl was all determined by this one little thing that happened and that one call.
Right. Well, you go through that episode in your book. I saw that this morning, actually, when I was preparing for this interview. So let's get back to your book. Where can people find it? Well, I guess it's September 5th. People can find it probably all over the place, right?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Hey, look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a grifter. I poured a lot of my heart into it. I want people to buy the book. I want you to buy the hard copy of the book, which is the most expensive version. But I'll tell you, the one that's going to be most valued to most people is going to be the electronic version of the book, because there are 800 footnotes in this book. And so if you want information and you want to look back and find out what actually happened, and you want the original news story involved in that, that's where you're going to find the links to those.
So you'll be able to click on those footnotes to get to the original source.
Yep.
That's cool.
So it'll be very valuable, I think, for some people who really they want to dig deeper.
Yeah.
Again, I was compiling all this information in real time, and I was meticulously, going on and along like Antrim. Okay, so there's this story, and there's like 20 stories about it. At least. And so I was collecting all that up in real time, and compiling it and putting it into the book all along. And so there's a lot of good information there. There's some original stuff, analysis that I do that, for example, that shows how people were actually, we have the statistics, we have the data. People were returning their ballots earlier. And we can actually verify that that's what was happening in this last election. So, so there's some of that, but it's not like a typical, like I'm a professor, so, I'm not doing any sort of like big statistical models or anything like that. This is a book that's really pitched to a general audience. And so hopefully people will find it accessible, and again, well documented, and some interesting things that they may learn about how our elections work, how historically they've worked, and how they worked in the 2020 election.
Well, I can say that even though it does have a lot of footnotes in it, and even though it from the look of it, it looks a little bit scholarly. The thing is really a well-written, easy read. It's not a difficult read at all. And so you guys get a chance to take a look at it when it comes out on September 5th. I recommend it. And I'm looking forward to my hard copy of the thing, which I understand is on the way. So I do appreciate that. Michael, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. Great talking to you.
Good talking with you, Bob.
All right. Hey, guys, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this Lean to the Left video, and you'll come back on a regular basis and check out our interviews with guests on topics that I hope you find interesting, entertaining, and enlightening. Our audio interviews stream weekly on Mondays, and depending on what's going on, also on Thursdays. And many are also produced as videos like this one. In addition, we provide narrations of much of the commentary published on the Lean to the Left blog. commentary by some excellent writers with perspectives on a whole range of topics. Now you can sign up as a member at leantotheleft.net. And of course, it's all free. Also, let your friends know about this podcast and take a minute to subscribe. Just go to podcast.leantotheleft.net and you can subscribe there. You can also check out the upcoming interview schedule, and you can listen to all of our episodes too. You can also support this podcast by clicking on the Donate tab at the top of the page, where you'll find links to buy me a cup of coffee and also PayPal. Follow us on social media: Facebook at the Lean to the Left Podcast, Twitter at Lean to the Left 1, Instagram at Not Fake News. Now remember, our goal is to be informative and entertaining as we comment on the latest developments in the news. You guessed it, with just a little lean to the left. Now this is Bob Gaddy signing off for Lean to the Left. Thanks for sharing your time with us.